Nobody knew his name. On the harbour records, he was listed as dock worker James M. For 23 years he worked the same pier, hauling heavy containers, helping load ships. The younger workers called him Old Jim and thought he was just another aging dockhand waiting for retirement. But that stormy evening, when he dove into the water to save the family trapped in the drifting boat near the marina, nobody had seen how he danced with the waves, because this man wasn't just moving cargo, he was the forgotten legend of the seas. Welcome to Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful tale, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button, because some stories don't just deserve to be told, they deserve to live. At San Diego Harbor's Pier 7, in the shadow of the massive cargo cranes, James Mitchell repeated the same ritual every morning. With worn work gloves in hand and a thermos of coffee, he would sit on the pier's edge and watch the ocean. His hands had once held very different things: steering wheels, nautical charts, compass bearings, the command wheel on a naval bridge. Now they only gripped cargo containers and rope. Captain James Mitchell had once been one of the U.S. Navy's most experienced ship commanders. For 35 years he had crossed oceans, weathered every kind of storm, and dozens of crews had entrusted their lives to his command. But after that terrible night in 2001, everything changed. During a mission in the Persian Gulf, his destroyer had struck a mine. He had saved every single crew member, but lost his ship. Technically, it wasn't his fault. Intelligence had failed to report the minefield. But James could never forgive himself. He had turned in his commission. Even when private shipping companies offered him positions, he refused them all. And one day, he applied for a job as a dock worker at the same harbour. Nobody recognized him. His hair had gone grey. His face had weathered. He registered his name as James M. and never used his surname Mitchell. For 23 years he had walked these piers. Where ships he once commanded used to dock, he now moved cargo. Nobody gave him a second glance. Just another ordinary dock worker, silent and invisible. When young workers told sea stories, James would listen quietly, notice their mistakes, but never say anything. Sometimes he would watch improperly tied knots and sigh internally, but he never interfered. He was no longer a captain, just Worker Jim. Until that stormy evening when Naval Engineer Lieutenant Marcus Webb entered his life. Marcus was a fresh 28-year-old naval engineering graduate, bright, ambitious, but with limited deep-sea experience. He was doing his rotation at the Naval Station San Diego to gain practical experience. That Saturday evening, the afternoon wind had turned into a storm by evening. Harbour traffic had stopped. Most workers had gone home. Only the night shift and a few stragglers remained. James was having his last coffee by the guard station when he heard screams coming from the marina direction. He ran to the pier's edge, and what he saw froze his blood. About 300 yards out, a white 35-foot sailboat was being pushed by the storm. There were 3 people on board, 2 adults and a small child. The engine had failed, the sail was torn. The wind was pushing them toward the rocky breakwater. "Help us!" they were screaming, but the storm drowned out their cries. Marcus had also seen the situation. He immediately called the Coast Guard, but due to the storm, rescue boats would take at least 45 minutes to deploy. The boat would hit the rocks long before that. "Someone needs to help them!" Marcus shouted, looking around frantically. James was assessing the situation. Wind northwest at 50 knots, wave height 4 feet, current southeast at 3 knots. The people on that boat had maybe 20 minutes, possibly less. Nobody can go out in this sea in this weather, yelled the harbour securities. God, it would be suicide. James paused for a moment. He hadn't been in the water for 23 years. But when he heard that child scream from the boat, his old reflexes returned. He stripped off his work coveralls. Underneath was an old wetsuit top. He still carried it out of habit.
"Old man, what are you doing?" Marcus asked. "You're too old. You'll drown in those waves." James looked at him. For the first time in 23 years, he made real eye contact with someone. "How old are you, son?" 28, but what does that have to do with anything? When I was your age, I was caught in my first storm.
What I learned was this. The sea doesn't care about your age, it cares about your experience. And with those words, he dove into the water. Marcus was shocked. How could this old dock worker swim so fast? The waves were tossing him like a toy, but James was adapting to the rhythm of each wave, dancing with the water instead of fighting it. 23 years of suppressed skills suddenly returned. His body still remembered how to breathe, how to conserve energy, how to dive under waves. The family on the boat was screaming in panic. The father was in his mid-30s, the mother younger, the child no more than 8 or 9 years old. When James approached them, the father shouted, "I don't know who you are, but thank you so much." James climbed aboard the boat. He quickly assessed the situation. Engine completely dead, mast broken, boat taking on water but not critically. The main problem was the boat drifting uncontrolled toward the rocks. "Do you have any sailing experience?" he asked the father. "Very little, just weekend trips." James took the helm. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from excitement. For the first time in 23 years, he was in command of a vessel again. "Get your child and wife below deck. Hold on to something secure," he commanded. His voice was no longer that of an old dock worker, but of an experienced captain. From the pier, Marcus watched the situation. This old man's commanding presence on the boat, his fight against the wind, his helm control. This was no ordinary worker. James took control of the boat's bow, trying to regain control of the situation. Without a working engine, using only helm control and reading the current, he had to navigate the boat to safe waters. "Which direction are we coming from?" the mother shouted fearfully. "Northwest. The current is taking us southeast, but I'm going to bypass the rocks and head for the safe cove." James's voice was confident. He could make these calculations with his eyes closed. Using helm control, he optimized the boat against the wind. He was reading the rhythm of each wave, moving the boat with minimal resistance. 23 years of naval experience had suddenly returned. "You're a sailor!" the father shouted. "These maneuvers can't be done by an ordinary person." James didn't answer. All his concentration was focused on reaching safe waters. Marcus and other workers at the pier watched the situation with bated breath. This old dock worker was masterfully navigating the boat in stormy seas. This was professional-level seamanship. 45 minutes later, James had successfully guided the boat to the safe cove. The family was saved, the boat damaged, but afloat. Coast Guard teams finally arrived as well. As they disembarked, the father firmly gripped James's hand. "You saved our lives. I don't know who you are, but you're an incredible seaman." James just nodded. "It's nothing. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they couldn't. You're a professional
"Sailor." When James reached the pier, Marcus ran up to him. "Jim, how is this possible? How do you swim so well? Navigate a boat?" James paused while putting on his clothes. For the first time, he wanted to tell someone the truth. Because 23 years ago I used to do this job, son.
Marcus looked at him in confusion. What job? Captain. For 35 years I commanded naval vessels. I crossed oceans. Marcus's mouth fell open. But you're a dock worker. James smiled. His first real smile in 23 years. In 2001, I lost my last ship in a big storm. I saved all the crew, but the ship was lost, and forgiving myself became impossible, so I quit being a captain and became a worker here.
But that's so wrong. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. You save lives. You saved them tonight too. James looked at the sea. Maybe my punishment is over. The next morning, James came to work at the same time, but this time he felt something different.
Walking on the pier, he could find traces of his old confidence. When Marcus saw him at the harbour, he ran over. "Jim, I called that family. They're doing great. The little girl sends her thanks." James was inwardly happy, but said nothing. "And," Marcus hesitated, "I spoke with my supervisor. I didn't give your name, but if you want, we can help you to get your captain's license back." James was shocked. "What do you mean?" "The naval station needs experienced captains, but they want to talk with you before learning your identity." That evening, James thought long and hard at home. When he looked at himself in the mirror for the first time in 23 years, he saw a captain. Not worker Jim, but Captain James Mitchell. Over the weekend, he met with the naval supervisor. When he revealed his identity, the experienced officer was surprised but understanding. "Mitchell, we know your legend. We know about the 2001 incident too. But losing a ship doesn't mean quitting the profession." "But I risked losing 40 crew members." "And you saved them all. That shows what kind of captain you are." James looked at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The supervisor continued, "If you want, we can bring you back into the system. You'd start with smaller vessels, then move to bigger projects." James looked at the pier. Where he had worked as a labourer for 23 years, now he had the chance to be a captain again. "I accept," he said quietly. 3 months later, James put on his uniform again. This time it was different. Experience had made him stronger. On his first assignment, when the young sailors called him Captain Mitchell, he finally felt like he had come home. Sometimes legends don't stand on podiums. Sometimes they push cargo at dawn, silently making sure the next generation knows what it means to serve the sea. So what do you think Jake learned that day? And have you ever encountered someone like Jake? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, subscribe to help keep these kinds of stories alive.